All right, welcome in Powers on Sports podcast. The Olympics are a mere less than 2 weeks away from all the action starting in Paris, opening ceremonies, track and field, swimming, gymnastics, and all the rest. And with that being said, we are so pleased to going to be talking to a person that's not competed in not just one event, but he's competed in 10 different events: the 100, the long jump, the shot put, the high jump, the 400, the 110-meter hurdles, the discus, the pole vault, the javelin, and the grueling 1500-meter. No better person to talk about the Olympic experience, what the Olympic athletes have gone through to qualify for the Olympics, that the Olympic trials that just wrapped up, the 1996 gold medalist in the decathlon, Dan O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hey, thanks, JP. Glad to be here. Appreciate it. It's going to be a good year in track and field at the Olympics. Not just track and field. I think it's going to be a good year for a lot of different sports because I think we missed it. 2021 in Tokyo certainly was a great Olympics. I think for the athletes because whether you're competing in front of a lot of people or nobody at all, it's still an Olympic gold medal that you're going for. But the fans didn't get a chance to be there. And so this kind of feels like a little bit of a redemption Olympics for the organizers and for the fans to get back in there and start rooting for their home countries again.
Absolutely. And the first question I got to ask you, how was it like to have to work with Drew Felios for 10 straight days? That had to be a disaster for you, huh?
I like working with Drew. He's a great partner, but I'll tell you what, Drew wasn't ready for the 10-day grind. Okay. And, most of the stuff he does happens in a day, 2-3 days at the most. After we did 2 days of the decathlon, 2 days of the heptathlon, he looked at me and said, dude, I'm baked. And I said, I know track and field's a long schedule. It's a really long schedule. And at the Olympic trials, what they try to do is they try to simulate what it's going to be like at the Olympic Games. And that's a really long schedule. And it's heats and semifinals and finals. So athletes are running a lot of races to make it to the finals.
Yeah, I know. And the reason I mentioned Drew is Dan and Drew worked the Special Olympics last year over in Germany. So that's how I got to meet Dan about a year ago. They did a great job doing the Special Olympics, and now they got teamed up again working for NBC and Peacock. They were in the Olympic trials out in Eugene for 10 straight days, which I know for I don't care if it's the analyst or the broadcaster or the athlete, that's a long haul to be in the same place for 10 straight days like that. All right. Let's get to the Olympic trials. Again, you covered the Olympic trials a little bit. I don't want to necessarily talk about a lot of individual people. I want to talk about the pressure of the Olympic trials, from two aspects. One, from a guy or a girl that's really highly ranked and they're expected to make the team, and then you got the other end of the ledger where somebody that's aspiring to make the team. Maybe they're a middle of the road player or they're right on the edge of making the team. Talk about the pressures of the two different sides of that ledger there, from the favorite versus the one that's right on the edge.
Well, what's interesting is, the question in the sport of track and field is, are we selecting our team correctly? All right. This is the fairest method that we have. And the fairest method right now is get in the top 3 at the Olympic trials, and you pretty much book your ticket to the Olympic Games. All right. And as long as I can remember, going back to the 1970s, maybe in the late 50s and early 60s, there were multiple opportunities, especially in the decathlon, to make an Olympic team. But from the 70s on up, it was the top 3 at the Olympic trials go. And that's the way it's been in every single event. And, we've seen some good people not make the Olympic team in the past. Certainly, I was one of those guys in 1992. So the question remains is this the best way to pick the team? And I'm not sure you're going to send your very best team, but you're going to it's going to be the most, it's going to be the most fair way to pick your team. And so when you do go to the Olympic trials, there is a chance that your best people aren't going to make it. Something could go wrong. You could get food poisoning. You might not show up that day with your best effort. So ultimately, every Olympic trial, somebody gets left out. So as a favorite, I think I think I'm an easy guy to talk to about the pressure because, I was there in 1992. I was a world champion. I was the American record holder, and I didn't qualify for the 92 Olympics. And before that happened, you couldn't explain to me how much pressure there was, but then when that happened, I was just like, oh, I can't explain to you how difficult it is to perform under those circumstances. That's where experience and seasoning and maturity really goes a long way. And so I didn't, I wasn't there as a young athlete. I didn't have the tools. I wasn't equipped with the tools to overcome that pressure. So I had 3,000, three missed jumps in the pole vault, and I didn't score in that event, so I didn't make the Olympic team. And then in 1996, when I was there as again one of the favorites, I mean the pressure was just enormous. But I had the tools. I had all my mental tools. I had my physical tools. I had my A, B, C, D plan all set up. So I was able to make it through those Olympic trials. And so for the favorites, it seems a little unfair. It's like, wait a minute, I win world championships, and I won the. For some people, it's like even they might have been 2-time Olympic champion. They still have to get through the trials, and it makes it really fair. As a young and up and coming athlete, all year long, you dream about your opportunity to mix it up with the best people in the country for a chance to make that Olympic team. And there were some people, I think, who really had some great performances and were surprised a little bit to get on this Olympic team going to Paris. It's a little more fun as a young up and coming athlete because maybe the pressure's not as great.
Right.
But you get there and you realize when you don't make the team, you might dream about it for 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden you get there, but you've never been there before, and you just go, okay, now I get it. Now I understand what all the pressure is about. So, it's a fair way to pick the team. Yeah, it's a fair way to pick the team. But even Michael Johnson will tell you, there's a chance we're not going to send our best team.
In your view, and again, every Olympic committee and around the world has different rules of how they pick their team. Do you think there ought to be a provision if a Dan O'Brien has a bad day, one bad event out of 10, but he's dominant and he's been the best guy in the world for the last X number of months or years or whatever, do you think there ought to be a provision where the USOC or the committee can say, we're putting Dan O'Brien on the team, I don't care how he performed at the Olympic trials?
I'm not sure. That's still a question that I'm trying to figure out, because when it happened to me, of course, hey, let's figure out a way to, to at least give our favorites another chance. And then you start looking at other countries saying, look, if I was in Canada, I wouldn't even have to go to the Olympic trials. If I was in Great Britain, I probably wouldn't even have to compete in the Olympic trials. But here in the United States, that's the program that we set for ourselves. It happened this year, Athene Mo in the women's 800 meters. She gets into the finals. She hadn't raced a lot this outdoor season. She gets into the finals. She gets tripped up. She goes down with, still 600 meters left in the race.
It's over.
She got up.
It's over.
And it was absolutely over. We weren't seeing the best Athene Mo that we'd seen over the last 4 years, but there was a lot of speculation. She was the Olympic champion. She had, she was the best American over the last 3 years. Is there a way to get her on the team? And as it stands right now, there is no way. There's no real protest or, any other second opportunity. I think some of the events, it's worth a conversation. And when I say some of the events, like the decathlon,
yes,
the Olympic trials, it's really, you got to show up and compete at that one particular event, which is the Olympic trials. But because it's such a daunting event, because you only do it 2 or 3 times, maybe 3 times at the max each year, there might be a better way to select that team, and that team would be to, maybe do a 2 or a 3 meet a combined score
accumulation, right.
Yeah, an accumulation, and say, look, you got to score at this meet and this meet. You add them together. That way, it takes the guessing out of really who your top 5 people are. So. We'll see if that leads to anything. But honestly, as it stands right now, it is what it is.
And if you don't remember, folks, I know this is a long time ago, but man, Dan was the #1 decathlete in the world, was the 91 world champion coming into the Olympic trials. Him and Dave Johnson were clearly the best 2 American decathletes. And, he mentioned he didn't mark in the pole vault. And how long did it take you to get over that, Dan? He came back and won the 93 world championship, and honestly, emotionally, how long did it take you to absorb, oh my God, I didn't make the team?
You gotta figure, I was in a daze for 48 hours. I was in mourning for 2 weeks.
Right.
And luckily I got a call, and NBC said, "Hey, join us in Barcelona.
Right.
We want you to broadcast the decathlon and the heptathlon." And so, there were a lot of consolations, but no, I mean, it was like a family member passed away, and not just for me, the people around me.
Sure.
I think my dad was more devastated than I was.
Right.
It just was
Right.
one of those, your family and your friends take the loss a little bit harder than you, because as an athlete, look, winning and losing is part of the game. Okay, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but I was being the best in the world, being the best in the United States at that particular time. When it happens, it's pretty devastating. But I can say that had it not been for the people in my close circle,
Right.
I wouldn't have been able to get over that. I had great coaches, I had good training partners. I lived in Moscow, Idaho, and I'll never forget. I got off the plane after being at the Olympic trials and not making the team. Well, my attorney rounded up about 100 people, and they met me at the airport and welcomed me back. So it's moments like that made it possible for me to, kind of reset and reset my goals and move on to the next competition. But it took a while. And what's interesting is you don't stop hearing about it until you lace them up the following year. And so,
Right.
that's just agony. 6 months, 7 months. It's like, until you start competing, you can't put any of those doubts to rest. And even at the next world championship, the announcer, all he can talk about is the failure from 92. And I said, dude, I'm here to win this one tonight. Don't worry about the one last year.
Let's talk about the people that did make the team. I mean, again, you had a ton of guys, people known people in the track and field world, and then other people that are not so known. We got a 16-year-old kid who almost made, the kid from the high school kid from Maryland that he made it to the final. I'm not sure, is he on the Olympic relay team? Has that been confirmed yet if he's going?
Yeah. So Quincy Wilson is a
Yep.
young man's name, and he'd been just running
Great.
lights out all season long. Pin
16-year-old high school
relays.
kid.
Oh,
Unbelievable.
like making a name for himself indoors, and then at the pin relays, and just running these spectacular times in high school. And he shows up at the Olympic trials, and I'm thinking, if he runs the times he's been running, he'll get to the finals. And if you get to the finals, they take the top three to
Right.
run the 400 meters, but then they'll go 6 or 7 deep to make up the relay team. And so,
Right.
there's little Quincy Wilson. What's amazing is when a high school kid stands out there with pros,
Yeah.
he looks so young. Oh man. I mean, there's some young college kids out there, but a high school kid, just no muscle definition.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
5'7". He just looks out of place out there, but he got sixth place, and he was named to the US Olympic relay team. So, I don't know if he'll run there in Paris, but he's going to get an opportunity to be around it, be in it,
Experience.
be at the practice. I think it'll be really fun. We might see him, in maybe the mixed relay.
There you go. All right, let's talk about a couple. So the guys and ladies that have made the team. Let's talk about some logistics of the Olympics, of the experience. Do all the track and field athletes travel together to Paris, or will they all get there on their own and meet up? How does that work logistically from the USOC's perspective?
Well, usually in the sport of track and field, because it's a long program, it's I believe it's 9 days of track and field, and you may not run till the end.
Right.
And so, if you run at the beginning, obviously you want to be there 4, 5, 6, 7 days early. But a lot of the track and field athletes will go at the beginning because you want to go through the opening ceremonies. All right. But, imagine being at the Olympics and not being able to compete for 18 or 19 days. And so usually what the US track and field team does, USA track and field, they have their own separate hotel near a training facility. And so every day they can go to that training facility. And so you've got your coaches there, you've got you've got the people that you're training, sometimes your training partners. And so they all eat together, they all live together. And it's a pretty long process. They'll spend the better part of a month together leading up to these Olympic Games.
So your personal coaches. I know the U.S. Federation has the track and field coaches, but your own personal coaches get to go with you as part of the delegation, or how does that work? Do they have to pay their own way? How does all that work with your coaches, your personal coaches that have been working with you 11 months out of the year?
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about this is, a lot of times, most of the time, your personal coaches are not selected as the Olympic team coaches. Okay.
Right.
And so you need those personal coaches along, and everybody's got them.
Yeah.
And so they have to make their own arrangements.
Wow.
And what the toughest part is is it's getting a credential. Getting a credential that allows those personal coaches to go into the practice area, getting a credential that allows them to sit in the coaches' boxes during the competition and things like that. And it's much easier today than it was, I'm going to say 20 years ago. I mean, a coach had to buy a ticket to watch his athlete from the stands. You know, it's just, yeah, it's pretty nutty. But now what you're seeing as well is you think about a college coach who coaches some of these kids who made these Olympic teams. They coach Jamaican kids, they coach German kids, they coach, they coach athletes from other countries, and pro coaches as well. There's a number of pro coaches here in the United States that coach, there's a coach, Travis Geffert from Arkansas. He's going to coach athletes from 5 or 6 different countries. Wow. All right. And so if he can't get a credential with the U.S. Olympic Committee or the USA team, then he's going to try to get one from Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago. You know, he'll try to work an angle from someplace else, or Puerto Rico for that matter. Right. But that's I think one of the toughest things. But you got to think about it now. You know, I had 2 coaches. If every athlete had 1 coach, that's an extra person, and they just don't give out that many. They just don't give out that many team spots. But one of the most prestigious, I think, coaching selections is becoming an Olympic team coach, and that just means that you've got a lot of seniority, that you've been in the sport of track and field a long time. You've run a successful collegiate program. You've run a successful professional program, and to get selected and be an Olympic team coach in the sport of track and field is very prestigious, and a lot of times just a one in a lifetime opportunity.
So the days of the Olympic Village are over. There's no more. Is there a theoretical Olympic Village, or does each athlete have an option to stay there or stay somewhere else?
Well, for track and field, athletes will get an opportunity to stay in the Olympic Village, but as you get close to competition, like before the Olympics start, there's a training camp someplace in Paris, and that'll be a hotel next to a training facility. Okay. All right. Then when the Olympics start, a lot of times the athletes' village will be built, within a university of some kind. And so all the facilities will be right there. So athletes can stay at the Olympic Village, and then they'll just be able to, wake up, walk out to the track, do your thing. The U.S. team will still have this other available hotel space in this training camp, certainly. So as you get closer to the competition, maybe you want to move out of the athlete village because you're not used to sleeping in, dorm rooms like with other people. Right. So, but the athlete village is alive and well. It's still all the rumors that go along with it. I mean, everything you've heard about it is probably pretty true. I didn't stay at the Olympic Village in 1996. It was at Georgia Tech University, and it was beautiful accommodations. But I was 30 at the time. I traveled a lot, stayed alone a lot, so I got a hotel room right downtown.
You could afford to do it, but a lot of them maybe couldn't back in the day.
Absolutely. And I had the same agent as Michael Johnson, so I always got to ride his coattails a little bit. And where Michael stayed, I got a discounted rate.
Attaboy. All right, so you mentioned training facility when you get to Paris. So, if the U.S. is in a hotel and they're training at a whatever indoor facility, is it a high school kind of facility? I mean, there can't be a zillion different track facilities in and around Paris. Do you guys share the space with other countries, other athletes? I mean, how does that work as far as once you get to Paris, prepping for your event?
So, and I think, this will go along with World Championships as well, but within the city of Paris, there's probably, you got to figure there's 8 or 9 tracks. All right. And those tracks will be designated, and they don't do sports in Europe quite like we do. So they're more athletic clubs. Okay. And so as a young athlete, you'll join, it'd just be, it'd be the Dick's Sporting Goods Athletic Club. And that's where you, instead of doing junior high sports or high school sports, you would take place at your sports would take place at that athletic club. So a number of these athletic clubs open up their facilities. But it's high security. When you've got Olympic athletes going in and out, you've got to have your credentials and, get scanned going in, going out, and they check your bags and everything. But there are probably, my guess, going to be between 6 and 10 of these locations in Paris. Yeah. And then they'll set up a schedule. One of them will be for the U.S. will say between 10 and 1 p.m., 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. will be U.S. And then U.S., Great Britain, and Jamaica. Okay. And then at 1 o'clock, they'll bring in 4 or 5 more, 4 or 5 other countries. Yeah. And that's kind of the way. Or sometimes it'll be, at this location from 9 a.m. till noon is throwing only, shot put, discus, hammer, javelin. Yeah, so that, you're not trying to run around the track and people are throwing javelins and all
Right.
kinds of stuff. So yeah, there's some pretty intense schedules, and it's always interesting when you go to another country to compete in a track meet. Maybe you haven't heard the, runners take your mark set in a command in another language.
Right.
All right. And so it's always important to go down to the practice track and listen. But I think at the Olympics, it's all going to be in English. But, world championships, I've heard the, runners take your mark set command, were probably in 10 different languages throughout my career. And you got to know what they are.
Talk about I want to talk about the finances of being an Olympian and all that stuff. Are you, as far as, do athletes, are they getting a contract of some sort between the Olympic trials they've made the team and the Olympics? I mean, is there any kind of contractual stipend that everybody who's on the team gets? How do the finances work once you officially make the Olympic team throughout the Olympics? How does all that work?
So as an Olympic athlete, you're considered a professional. You're competing on a professional ranks. I mean, we've talked about the word, amateurism for years. And I think, the word amateurism, it really only exists, in college and in amateur golf, tennis, things of that nature. But in the world of track and field, once you get out of college and you run in a professional race, whether you win money or not, you're a professional.
Right.
All right. And a lot of the athletes going to the Olympics, they have endorsements. They've got their own shoe deals. They've got their own,
Right.
nutritional deals, things of that nature. Athletes made money making the Olympic team, but they didn't get a ton. I think if you won the Olympic trials, you got $12,000 or $13,000
Right.
just to win the Olympic trials. But every athlete who has an endorsement deal in their contract, they'll get bonused for making the Olympic team, and those bonuses could range anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
Just kind of based on your contract, and so many of the shoe deals are incentive based.
Right.
Make a world championship team, win a medal. Make an Olympic team, win a medal. And so what happens usually is you're on a base salary. You make an Olympic
A lot of
team,
these
you
guys
win.
aren't getting rich. I mean, a lot of these guys are
No,
struggling to make a living. I mean, the upper end guys are making, women are making a nice living with the deals. But if you're the fifth or sixth best hurdler that's trying to make the team, you're not making you're making a decent living. I get a livable, but you're not making big money, correct?
no, you're absolutely right. And there's only a handful of people. I would say you could probably count on two hands the track and field athletes in the world that are making $1 million a year.
Right.
Okay. And that's really extreme. And I could be even wrong about that. There might even be just 5 people who make $1 million a year. So, but a lot of your high end sprinters are making $100,000 to $250,000 a year as an endorsement deal. But what's great, and just take for example, athletes making $100,000, they make an Olympic team and they win a medal. Okay, so they get, they get 40 grand for making an Olympic team, and they get another 25 grand for making the Olympic team. I mean, for winning an Olympic medal. Right. Well, that usually that 40 and that 25 gets put on the next year's contract. So instead of 100 grand, I'm making 165 grand. So these athletes, they're incentive based. So you just want to hit your bonuses, add them up. And before you know it, you got 2 or 3 years. And if you're winning medals, if you're making teams, then you're going to be making some pretty good money in the sport of track and field. But honestly, the way that the shoe companies split up these contracts, there's no way to keep track of them. I mean, it's like worse than NIL deals right now. And these shoe companies don't have to disclose what they're paying each of those people. So when you see in print, Noah Lyle's going to sign the biggest contract ever since Usain Bolt. And it's like, okay, well, what's that number? Yeah. Well, we're not going to tell you the number, but it's bigger than Usain Bolt ever did. And so you got to do your research. It's like, oh, Usain Bolt's biggest deal was $3 million a year. And, Noah's signing bigger than that. So it's like, all right, now that guy makes his money though.
but there's a real struggle for the javelin throwers, the hammer throwers. Oh. They're not making big money in any of these deals. So I mean, their Olympic experience is so critical because that's the way they're going to make a decent chunk of change. Correct?
Absolutely. World championships and Olympic qualifying. Get into a finals and put yourself in medal.
Back to the pressure and the anxiety.
Yep, medal contention. And not, and that's the thing. The field events are so different than the sprinting events and the running events because they just don't get as much publicity. Right. Even a guy like Ryan Krauser, who's the best shot putter of all time, it took him a lot of years to get to the point where he's at, but now he's won world championships and multiple Olympic gold medals. And, he's probably getting paid finally what he what he should be, what he absolutely should be. But, that fifth, sixth, seventh place guy in the world in the shot put just isn't making that much money. And, but I can say that the fifth, sixth, seventh place, best sprinter in the world is making a really good living. So there's a big disparity right now between field events and running events.
Talk about an event like yours, and that as far as this month-long period between the trials and the Olympics. How do you manage your training? Do you simulate doing a decathlon at some point during this month period, once or twice, to get the physical feeling again of what that? How do you take 3 or 4 days off after the trials? How do you manage that month period between the trials and the Olympics from a training perspective? Because you don't want to get hurt, but you don't want to get out of shape either.
Well, and a lot of times what happens between the trials and the Olympic Games, this is a pretty short window. This year, 2024, and it's a lot. I'm sure it's a lot different than it was in. Actually, in 2021 in Tokyo, they moved the decathlon up to May, so the athletes would have more time to rest, recover, and prepare for the Olympics that were going to be in late July. And it was just something they did as a test, and I think the athletes appreciated it. But what they didn't appreciate is that what the Olympic trials for the decathletes and heptathletes wasn't held at the same time as the Olympic trials, so the crowds weren't as big and the drama wasn't as great. But no, you get done with a decathlon, and you got a month, you got 5 weeks, you use that for preparation, man. This is like going up to Big Bear and getting ready for, you're in boxing camp. Gotcha. So you're doing everything you can, using every single day and every session to prepare for those Olympics. Usually when you get done with the decathlon, it's 3 or 4 days of absolutely nothing, and then you start moving back into training. And usually within a week, you can get back to full training. But man, there's not a day that goes by that it's not planned. These are my 2 work days. This is a rest day. 3 days of work, 2 days of rest, and you're really trying to get everything out of your body and be prepared as much as you can leading up to those Olympics.
At some point, whether it's 2 weeks out or it's 18, will you simulate a decathlon where you'll do all the events over 2 days, or do you just work on individual technical things with the events, maybe that you need some help in or struggling in or whatever it is?
No, and I think as you get older, you don't have to do as many events to prepare for it. Okay. So, and just for example, when I was younger, I used to do three decathlons a year. Okay. And that was pretty good. But then as I got into my late 20s, it was just like, no, all I do is US champs and the big meet, Olympic trials and the Olympics, US champs and the world champs. Just give me 2. This is such a demanding event, 10 events. You might simulate 3 or 4 in a day, and you'll just work on those field events and you'll do some running. But no, it's too much. It's too much. It's too hard to recover if you try to put in too many events per day. And so these athletes, I think the biggest part, really the thing that athletes need more than anything leading into a decathlon is getting the proper rest, so that for 2 days you can just put it all out there. And I mean, these athletes, they'll lose 5 to 10 pounds, over a 2-day period. They've got to keep their nutrition up, their hydration. So yeah, you just don't want to put that kind of stress. And it's very similar to the marathon model. A marathoner might do a 10-mile run, he might do a 12-mile run, but he's not going to simulate an entire marathon before he gets there.
For you, what were your 1 or 2 events that you really had to work on technical things in order to, now again, not that you had to win the event, but that you didn't want to have a really poor performance for you?
Well, I think for me, it was just staying in touch with the throwing events. Okay. And my coaches and our theory was, don't let more than a couple days go by since the last time you practiced it. Okay. So if I practiced javelin on a Friday, I expected to practice it again on a Monday. At 2 days goes by, I want to be able to step in and pole vault. Okay. So a lot of people just say, hey, Tuesday's the day I pole vault, and then I don't pole vault again until the following Tuesday. I didn't like that theory. I like to keep in touch with the events. And so I would go to the World Championships, I'd go to the Olympic Games, and all of a sudden my coach and I'd look at each other and go, oh my gosh, it's been 4 days since we threw the shot put. All right, we got to get out there. So just keeping in touch, and for me, it was the field events. It was the throwing events, because they're really just about, hey, balance and rhythm and tempo. And so you just never want to forget. You never want your body to kind of forget how to do those. You don't forget how to run. You don't forget how to hurdle. And most of the times, if you're jumping events or you're good events, you're not going to forget how to long jump or high jump. So you touch up on the pole vault. You make sure that you're getting your reps in the shot put in the javelin.
Give me a quick thought on two athletes that I think could be breakout stars. And again, they're known commodities now, but boy, they could, with good Olympics, they could be worldwide stars. Noah Lyles, Sydney McLaughlin.
Well, they're already stars. But what you got to love about Noah Lyles is the guy's not afraid to tell you what he's going for. All right. So many people, because track and field is such a hard event, so many people are after you. You rarely get somebody to stand out front and say, man, this is what I'm going to do. And when you ask him, well, how can you say that? How can you be so confident? And he says, I believe in talking it into existence. And it's like, man, you got to give it up. When he puts it out there, he usually wins. And I love his personality. Sydney McLaughlin, she lets her performance on the track speak for itself. She's absolutely phenomenal. She's the greatest ever 400-meter hurdler. I would have loved to have seen her have a really healthy season in the 400 meters last year. She didn't quite get there. Right. A couple of names that people may not be very familiar with in the men's 100 meters. Look at a guy by the name of Kenny Bednarik. Okay. He made a name for himself at a Division III college, and he's made every world championship and Olympic team over the last 5-6 seasons. He's always running fast, but he ran a lot of 200s until this season. Then this year he gets second at the Olympic trials in the 100 meters. He's a sleeper who nobody can even find any odds on this guy at the casino right now, because people just don't think he's going to win win the Olympic gold medal in the 100 meters. But watch out for him. He's somebody that we should keep an eye on. We'll see him on the 4x1 relay. We'll also see him run the 200 meters, which is, Noah Lyles' race as well. So, but he'll be a U.S. guy who competes against Noah Lyles. On the women's side, I was going to say, on the women's side, fantastic story in the women's 200 meters is a young lady named Mackenzie Long, Ole Miss senior. She won the NCAAs in the 100, 200, and the 4x1. First time that anybody's done that in a really long time. But her mother passed away in February. Okay. And she said every time she's on the track, she runs for her mother, and she's having a career year. What a phenomenal. She didn't make the team in the 100 meters, but she made it in the 200 meters. But because she's so good in the 100, they may put her on that 4x100 meter relay. And she's just somebody that I think is just will be, I think if media catches her story, it's really amazing, having the toughest year of your life with the greatest year running in your life.
Two more, I'll get you out of here. Talk to me about, give me a quick thought about the sight line adjustments. These athletes, whether it's sprinters, whatever, are used to running in 5,000-10,000 seat stadiums. Now you're running an Olympic stadium where it's 65,000-70,000. Just talk about the difference in the sight lines and getting used to the monstrosity of the Olympic stadium.
Well, it's not quite like playing basketball at at Duke, and then playing basketball, in a football stadium. Right. It's not the same. It's not quite the same as that, because a lot of these athletes, when they do compete overseas, they compete in some pretty large stadiums. Okay. But this is where experience comes in. All right. This is where your age and your maturity comes in just a little bit. If you haven't been there before, your first time you step into that Olympic stadium, it's going to be big. It's going to be a little daunting, but what you realize is, hey, that track's 400 meters long. The 100 meter starts here, it finishes here, and so I think for the young athletes, it's an opportunity to get there, get that experience, and so when you go back, you know what to certainly expect. I think that was one of the things that threw me off in my first Olympic trials was, I hadn't been in front of crowds that big before. But by the time I finished my career, I'd been in a stadium of every size. Nothing really surprised me that much. So I think sometimes the sight lines will affect the hammer throwers. The sight lines will affect the javelin throwers, just because they're used to a little bit more intimate settings. And now the throwing area looks tremendously long. So I think we just need to keep an eye on first timers versus veterans.
Last question for you. So you had the awful feeling of 92. You come back in 96, home country in Atlanta, you win the gold medal, you're on the podium. Before that, before the anthem starts, and as the guy's getting ready to put the gold medal around your neck, excuse my language, are you thinking to yourself, I'm the baddest motherfucker on the planet right now? I mean, I have proven all the doubters wrong. What's that thought when that's all that's happening in that moment?
I think your first thought is, man, I'm the most tired. I'm the most tired MFer on this track right now. I felt like that when I practiced. I mean, when I was training on the track and I was at Washington State University and the University of Idaho, I used to just think, man, I'm the baddest. I'm the baddest dude in the planet. But when you're at the Olympic Games, you're the most humble of athletes because you get a chance to see your flag go up in front of your fans.
Yeah.
So there's a feeling of pride
And the redemption
just,
for you, especially.
it was, but you flash back on how you got there. You
Right.
flash back on the long runs and the early mornings and the nights you stared at the ceiling and dreamt about it. All that stuff comes flooding back, and you really get emotional about it. So, rarely ever are you charged up. You're usually just exhausted by the time you get there.
Well, Dan, you're an unbelievable story for all the younger listeners in the audience. I definitely recommend go Google this guy. This guy had an unbelievable run. He won 3 world championships, 91, 93, 95, the 96 gold medal in Atlanta. Had to overcome all the obstacles he had to overcome, both personally and professionally. And one thing I want to see you outrun Snoop Dogg on the track now. We saw Snoop trying to run at the Olympic trials. I want to see a Twitter video of you and Snoop Dogg doing the decathlon. Take him through the decathlon with old Snoop
Well,
Dogg.
I still got a little run in these legs. I could have beaten that time, but no, I'd love to take him through some field events. That'd be fun.
Well, Dan will be at the Olympics doing a bunch of sponsor stuff and making some appearances all over the place. So if you're in Paris and you see Dan, give him a shout out. First gold medal winner since 1976, back in 96 for the decathlon. Great athlete, great guy, great broadcaster as well. Dan, I really appreciate the time, man. Enjoy the Olympics, and we'll talk real soon, okay?
All right. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.